Chapter 61. The Lost One statues are always broken. The crumbled Gregory at Hogwarts, patched by careless mending charms, hiding a secret passage, was a lesson in that. Severus Snape felt like that statue now, freed from a long stagnation and forced to turn sharply toward the young wizard who had shattered it. But silence is relative. Snape's eyes were as cold as ever. Chien was oblivious to the chill, lit instead with a quiet excitement. He lit the cauldron with practiced hands and opened a glass cabinet full of oddly shaped specimens. A smooth slip of paper, advanced potion making, was tucked inside, its edge nearly lost in the steam. Material processing, heat, stirring, ritual. Chien mouthed the steps, recalling every annotation in his notes. These steps, the product of repeated summaries and improvements, were how he consistently brewed proficient potions. Today, he hoped his Murtlap essence would rise in quality again. The possibility buoyed him. If you have any sense, Chien Green, you'll add those dried nettles only when the bubbles have just begun to appear. Snape's voice cut through the dungeon like a blade. Chien had already added the nettles before the sentence was finished. The shorthand quill beside him recorded the move. He did not flinch at the sarcasm. Snape's gaze paused, then snapped back into place. A low thunder rolled across the dungeon. Ignorance. Do you not know that stirring counterclockwise for more than 2.5 turns will ruin this potion? It'll be worse than the dregs. Chien stopped stirring calmly, counted the seconds, then added the slugs at the precise moment. When mockery found no purchase, the dungeons fell into the filtered sound of rain and the clink of his spoon. Snape's barbs dwindled to occasional icy instructions. It's time. Chien's eyes shone. Master Libatius Borrage's refined ritual was a complete procedure. Groundwork woven through every stage of brewing. Then at the end, everything snapped into place. The cauldron had reached its critical moment. At that instant, any small gesture could swing the potion's quality wildly. As Chien formed the final words and motions, Snape's pupils narrowed. He swept forward, black robes whipping like storm clouds, and came to the cauldron in a heartbeat. 2 slips of paper were clutched in his hand, their shapes unchanged, protected by layered enchantments. Chien was absorbed in the potion. He felt the subtle current of magic in the brew, and with a clarity that startled him, sensed how to guide it to a fuller integration. He could tell the potion's trajectory and nudge it toward expert quality. The panel prompt chimed then, precise and clinical. You have successfully brewed a pot of Murtlap essence to expert standards. Proficiency 50. The sound coincided with a strangled, furious growl from Snape. Chien jumped. Make your own bottle of revelry, Professor. The words fell out of him. An answer, an explanation he couldn't quite parse. Chien couldn't understand the sudden flare of anger. Give me the slip, he said, reaching for it. Snape's voice came out like it had been squeezed through iron. Chien took the smooth slip from advanced potion making that described heat. Along its edge, almost invisible, was a faint 3. He glanced quickly at the slip he'd just taken from Make Your Own Bottle of Revelry. It bore a faint 2. In the dim, rain-washed light, Snape's face was unreadable. The torrent outside made it hard to hear the whisper that seemed to come from him. Chien Green, get out of my dungeons. Now, immediately. The anger in his voice sounded like something decades old. Chien had felt the pressure in the air and was about to leave when a slip of paper drifted out of advanced potion making. For a moment he stood frozen, clutching the paper and staring into Snape's murderous gaze. Idiot! Get out! He ran, clutching the slips, and felt noticeably lighter once the heavy dungeon door shut behind him. What had happened? What did the numbers mean? If Snape knew that heat sequence, who was the second person? Why hadn't that person known the ritual? Confusion pooled in Chien's mind like rain on stained glass, forming a pattern that refused to be read. In the dungeons, the cold stone walls exuded their eternal dampness mixed with the sharp scent of aged potion ingredients, an atmosphere that had become Severus Snape's alone. He sat curled behind a massive black oak desk, like a bat in a crevice, staring at the slips as if they were the only things left in the world. In advanced potion making, 2 slips now lay together, marked 1 and 3. The missing slip had carried the days when he could still see bright sunlight, the secret he had shared with one other person. In Make Your Own Bottle of Revelry, the slips were scattered as 1 and 2. The absence of that third slip came down to one mistake he could never reverse. His fingers relaxed minutely. The slips remained uncreased, but his movements had lost their usual precision. He looked at the lost slip as if he could see through walls, to the rainy night and to the rupture that had come years ago. Hatred and a tearing, inarticulate grief battled in his chest. He heard, in his head, the word that had condemned him, a sin he could never wash away. He had planned to keep that slip forever. He had never expected a fool to stumble into the dungeons and find the notes. Knowing that notes would always be found by the next curious hand, he felt something like resignation. Truth did not end, neither did love and hate. In the corridor, torches threw light across suits of armor and the paintings. Sir Cadogan bustled between frames, knocking over a witch's wineglass and being scolded with a bouquet. He muttered to himself, unconcerned, "Aha, some stories never change." He hoards his hates and forgets his first love of potions. Now a new, faint story begins to stir. Is it hope? That's what they all say. Sheehan passed by then, and for a moment a dark shadow fell over him. He looked up to see Professor Snape standing there, more sudden and more severe than before. Green reflected in those dark, black eyes. "I want to see you in the dungeons for 3 days after every Thursday," Snape said, his voice a low threat. "Don't make me regret this decision." "Sorry, got stuck. I'll make it up with an update at dawn." Chapter 62, Complementary Rituals. Professor Snape's exit was as abrupt as his entrance, leaving a bewildered Sheehan standing there clutching 10 galleons while the portraits around him murmured and gawped. "Professor Snape is," one began. "Ha! Little Green, you don't think that dour, brave fellow's lost his mind, do you? Ha!" Sir Cadogan laughed as loudly as ever. The excitement diffused for a moment. CN stepped 100 meters down the corridor, and even the portraits seemed to draw back a couple of frames. When Snape returned, his face was darker than the storm clouds beyond the window. "Madam Violet, sir will be all right, won't he?" Sheehan asked quietly of the kindly woman in white. "What do you mean by all right?" Madam Violet replied with a smile that wasn't in the least threatening. "Do you mean burned by fire? Moved into a painting with a lot of trolls? Or," she chuckled, he will still be alive? As for anything more than that." Sheehan allowed himself a brief moment of mourning for Sir Cadogan, then continued down the corridor. Sir Cadogan's wails echoed after him long into the night. On the way back to the Ravenclaw common room, Sheehan pulled out the note he had rescued and read as he climbed the endless staircase. "As I said before, truth never compromises. A wizard who searches for it will always find it. When improved rituals heighten perception, talented wizards will notice those wonderful changes. Ignorant fools will remain steeped in rotten tradition, but true potions masters will never stop exploring. You may wonder why improved rituals are so rare." He turned the page, energized. The stairs suddenly seemed easier. "Remember, spell and potion are joined by a primordial thread. You should have felt this when using will to guide a brew. As you suspected, I have completed the required work. Each improved potion ritual has a unique method of will guidance recorded. Future generations should understand that this is Palaki's greatest pioneering work in the mysterious, profound field of potions. Next, I will reveal the secret of why potion is so full of magic." Sheehan held his breath. Rituals and will manipulation, were they complementary? The prize fund was still growing. The value of such a pioneering work was climbing. He felt a familiar awe. Magic is vast because when one wizard, full of longing, discovers a path, he opens a book and finds another wizard has already put it into words. Sheehan wrote the method down, word for word. He was facing a trove of wisdom accumulated over a lifetime by one of the greatest potions masters. When he checked his panel, he was surprised at how much his potion progress had advanced. Title, Potion Novice Murtlap Essence, Apprentice Level, 210-300. Advancement, completing 3 beginner-level potions unlocks the beginner title in potions. Murtlap Essence was nearly at beginner level. He needed to brew more potions to gain experience and unlock titles. Advanced potion making listed recipes for several brews: Common Antidote, Murtlap Essence, Forgetfulness Potion, Herbicide Potion, Sleeping Draught, Swelling Solution, Awakening Potion. Their difficulties were similar, and their usual prices ranged only a few galleons. Those were ordinary quality estimates. proficient quality potions would sell for considerably more, and exceptional quality could fetch even higher sums. Xian wondered if the reason low-level masters didn't brew low-grade potions was that high-quality brewing took skill only experienced masters possessed. His own expert-level Murtlap essence was worth 10 galleons. His wallet suddenly felt much heavier. Late that night, a gust flipped the purple-spotted cover of Advanced Potion Making, and a note slipped out, tumbling to the floor beside the sky-blue curtains. Yes, the journey continues. We still haven't found that definitive answer about the essence of potion. However, by chance, we discovered something unusual. Could this be a new beginning for potion? Palaki Monday dawned, and the Ravenclaw first years fell silent. They had 2 potions classes back-to-back that morning. Under the threat of a certain potions master, this was the most dreaded pair of lessons for the young wizards. Oh, Xian, slow down, slow down. Justin flustered as he worked under Xian's guidance. He always felt Xian improved with every brew, and even looking at Xian's notes didn't make things clearer. Terry, are we still processing ingredients? The potion next to us is already finished, Michael said, rolling snails and glancing at Terry as if to say, "You don't think I'm stupid, do you?" Yes. Terry's eyes went to Justin, who was collecting his potion, as if to confirm it. I find it hard to believe, but I believe you, Terry, Michael said, following the glance and quickly adding an earnest apology. Terry, I'm sorry for doubting you and Xian. Do you think we could ask Xian for tips after class? Just as the first potions lesson was wrapping up, Professor Snape came striding down the dungeon, his presence making the Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs duck their heads. Barely acceptable. His voice was cold. Add 1 point. Xian watched his potion progress under the beginner mark. He hadn't helped much this time, which meant Justin's talent with that particular brew had shown through. When the second class started, Snape announced they would be making a new potion, Swelling Solution. A collective groan rose from those who had just learned Murtlap essence, only to be swallowed under Professor Snape's glare. Xian's eyes, however, lit up. Swelling Solution, Snape said, his deep voice cutting through the dungeon. A seemingly simple potion, yet one that demands precision and intellect. He paused, a sneer curling his lips. For most of you, this demand will be far beyond your capabilities, so if any of you permit even the smallest distraction. The students shivered and sat bolt upright. The 3 ingredients for Swelling Solution were bat spleen, dried nettle, and pufferfish eyes. Xian hadn't pre-processed 2 of them, so he watched, unblinking, as Professor Snape demonstrated how to prepare each component. Chapter 63, Swelling Solution. Swelling Solution, as the name suggested, made parts of a thing swell. Xian didn't know all its uses, only that, like most potions, a bad brew or a careless application could have serious consequences. He remembered hearing about the second years. When Harry had thrown a firework into Goyle's cauldron, the splash had sent the potion flying, and people's arms, noses, and eyes had swelled up in the most ridiculous ways. So Xian watched Professor Snape's every move, his shorthand quill scratching furiously as he recorded each deviation from the book. Grind 2 spoons of dried nettle, grind 3 pufferfish eyes, put 2 portions of the ground mixture into the cauldron, heat for 20 seconds, then wave the wand. Snape's instructions often strayed from the manual and sometimes changed entire steps. If a young wizard let their mind wander for even a moment, following the book alone could lead to disaster. Maybe that was one reason Snape was so strict, almost terrifying with them. If your empty heads have finally absorbed something, he said with a curl of his lip, waving his wand to bottle the potion into crystal vials, then, paired up, begin. The class erupted into the clink and clang of utensils as the students set trembling hands to their cauldrons. Near the end of the brewing, just before the finishing instruction, Snape's voice sliced through. Process the last ingredient, brew until a layer of white foam appears on the surface. Justin, comparing their progress to his notes, looked even more nervous than Xian, who was stirring calmly. Snape was still patrolling the classroom, eyes sharp for any mistake. When he passed Xian and Justin, he paused and gave their notes a contemptuous glance. Quite detailed, barely at passing. Oh, and Xian, why is your foam blue? A shadow seemed to drop over Justin. Xian's face went a little pale. He met Snape's look and answered plainly, it failed. Justin didn't dare look up. For a moment, he seemed to be waiting for the worst. "Redo it, you two idiots," Snape barked, as expected. Relief washed over Justin when he realized they hadn't been docked points, at least not yet. He took command instantly. "You look pale. Do you want to rest? I'll finish it." His voice was steady. His light gray eyes were concerned. Once Snape had moved on, Justin handled the remaining steps, precisely processing the ingredients. Shi-En, though, was breathing hard. He had misjudged how much the previous brewing ritual and the guidance from Master Palaki had drained him. Palaki's ritual had pushed his magic beyond its normal limits. It could buy a brief surge of power for a single high-level brewing, but it left him weak afterward. Now, at the critical final stage, Shi-En could feel that his magical output wasn't enough. He sucked in a breath and noticed a small bowl of berry candies on the table. "Rest a bit. Try one," Justin offered, plucking one up. "New flavor. Berries from the Scottish Highlands." Shi-En nodded. He checked himself silently. He could still cast a few spells, but attempting the precise, sustained effort a potion demanded was beyond him right now. Potion work needed a steadier, deeper reserve of magic and will than many other things. No wonder potions masters were rare. He also realized how much power wand work could amplify. He could cast 3 or 4 levitation charms in a row and match a potion that made someone float. But brewing a comparable potion would send him under. Shi-En kept murmuring notes to Justin from his shorthand while they worked. Snape swept through the room like a storm. "Susan Bones, Lisa Turpin. Troll ingredient handling? You didn't get those pufferfish eyes processed properly at all." He sneered at the 2 girls whose brew had turned viscous. 1 point deducted each. "And what are you waiting for? Waiting for the potion to brew itself." As Susan shrank away, ready to cry, Snape moved on. "Ernie Macmillan, if you stir to the right again, get out. At least then this potion won't explode on its own." 2 points deducted. Ernie froze, trembling, eyes glued to his book. "Barely acceptable. Michael Corner, what are you waiting for? Waiting for the potion to spoil?" Snape had become a merciless points-deducing machine. -1, -2, punctuated the air like small blows. When he reached Shi-En and Justin's table, both braced for another attack. Snape glanced over them and, without a word, placed a small crystal vial in front of Shi-En. Inside was a clear liquid and a single note: "Drink." After leaving the dungeons, Shi-En still felt a little dazed. The vial was meant to restore vitality. It worked like a stimulant for his magical reserves. After drinking it, his magic flowed back into him more strongly, and even climbing the stairs felt easier. In the dungeons, Snape had lingered over their failed brew. In his rollbook, a faint line had been written: Shi-En Green, Guardian, none. The great hall buzzed with its usual noise and life. Long house tables were piled with plates. Golden platters and goblets gleamed beneath 1,000 candles. Students ate, talked, and laughed over oatmeal, bacon, and pumpkin juice. "Shi-En," Justin said, picking at a piece of pudding and leaning over. "My mother always says the sunrise is free, and so is the sunset." He paused, then lowered his voice. "So if you're tired, rest." Shi-En gave a quiet nod. He felt better, steadier. Then someone broke into a sing-song rhyme beside them. "Rabbit's eyes, the melodious tune of a harp, turn this clear water into fine wine." Shi-En glanced over in confusion and saw Seamus sitting next to him, grinning and waving his wand over a glass of water. "Oh, are you all right, Seamus?" Justin's voice cut through the murmurs. Seamus, in fact, looked anything but all right. He had clearly been bracing himself for the worst. He slid into a different seat just as a ripple of whispers ran down the table. What was Seamus trying to do, Ron? He attempted to conjure wine in his goblet. He managed to conjure weak tea 2 days ago, but after that, a sudden, scorching black plume of smoke exploded into the air and swallowed Seamus whole. Shards of glass and droplets of liquid flew in every direction. The students around him shouted and scrambled away. Hermione stumbled back, eyes wide. The smoke thinned and Seamus emerged, his face sooty as if he'd crawled out of a chimney, his hair standing on end and still smoldering. He kept coughing, blinking through the smoke as if stunned by the failure. Silence hung over the great hall for a heartbeat, then laughter broke out. Ron laughed so hard he knocked his elbow against the table and spilled pump juice. Harry couldn't help laughing either, ducking his head to hide it. Only Justin hurried forward with a handkerchief. "Are you all right, Seamus?" At that moment, the usual rush of owls swept into the hall with the post, distracting everyone just in time. Hermione alone kept watching Seamus with a suspicious frown. "Did you feel that magic?" Ever since Professor Snape had given Seamus that mysterious potion, one or two vials would occasionally reappear in his possession after he left the dungeons. Sometimes the vial's label read, "Drink," other times there was no label at all. When Seamus did show up in the dungeons carrying a crystal vial full of potions, Snape's sarcasm rained down like machine gun fire. Still, Seamus's progress with the swelling solution was rapid. He unlocked it in less than 2 days, and Snape had also taught him how to prepare the deflating draught. "With your troll-like technique, you'll need it," Snape had said. In any case, Seamus had learned another potion. The system panel had updated to show title, Potioning Potion, Apprentice Level, Swelling Solution, Apprentice Level, 100. Deflating Draught, not unlocked. Advancement, 3 entry-level potions can unlock the potion domain entry-level title. Compared with his slow but steady progress in potions, Seamus was advancing far more quickly in Defense Against the Dark Arts and Charms. On Tuesday, in Defense Against the Dark Arts class, Professor Quirrell stammered through a question, his timid gaze sweeping the Slytherins and Ravenclaws until Anthony stood to answer. "Mountain trolls, river trolls, and sea trolls," Anthony said. "Mountain trolls are the largest, pale gray, bald-headed, with skin rougher than a rhinoceros. They're stronger than 10 men, but their brains are the size of peas, so they get confused easily." "Very good, thank you," Quirrell managed. While Quirrell made a show of picking someone else, Michael was leafing through Seamus's Defense Against the Dark Arts notes beside him, as if they were a secret manual. "Sean," he began incredulously, opening Seamus's light blue notebook and comparing it to the Dark Forces, a guide to self-protection. The charms section in Seamus's notes was even more detailed than that book. "You didn't just use the Dada textbook. My goodness! This is as amazing as that History of Magic book." Seamus ignored him. His desk was scattered with books like Basic Defense Against the Dark Arts and Defense Against the Dark Arts, Introduction to Fundamentals. Quirrell's teaching left gaps, so Seamus had taught himself, quickly sorting out the framework of the dark arts. He'd been puzzled in his previous life. Both charms and the dark arts used incantations and wand work, so why were they treated as separate fields? After studying several texts, he found the answer. Charms and the dark arts were fundamentally different. The dark arts themselves split into 3 levels: jinxes, hexes, and curses. Jinxes had the least harmful effect, irritating, sometimes amusing. Examples: the repelling charm, the multi-corpus spell, the severing charm. Hexes were more harmful, causing pain or injury. Examples: the bat bogey hex, the knee reversing hex, the toenail growth hex. Curses were the most dangerous, causing severe or irreversible harm. Examples: Crucio, Imperio, the killing curse. Charms taught by Professor Flitwick were another category entirely. Everything finally made sense. Talent for the dark arts and talent for charms were not interchangeable. When class ended, Michael had Seamus's notes in his hands while Terry and the others crowded around, eager to read. "Ahem. You can look," Michael said, but Anthony raised an eyebrow. "Not a chance," Anthony snapped. Michael bolted, chased by the angry students. Muttering to himself, he explained, "These are Seamus's galleons. He doesn't care much, but I can't let them go to waste. I need to spread the word. Hey! It's working." Then he turned and gave Terry a playful smack on the head. "Terry, I told you Seamus agreed to share this with you, me, and Anthony, didn't I? You really forgot already?" At noon, on the Quidditch pitch, Seamus finished a charms practice and climbed onto an old Comet 260. Once airborne, he was no longer the boy who struggled to run or jump. The broom leaped into the air like a silver fish. His cheeks flushed in the wind, his body pressed to the broom as though it were a vine finding something to cling to. Diving, banking, climbing, he followed Madame Hooch's instructions precisely, and his skill kept improving. You practiced flying according to expert standards. The pale, frequently ill boy traced clean, elegant arcs through the sky. Madame Hooch, watching from the sidelines, couldn't help a small, approving smile. She turned to the tall witch beside her. "Seamus is truly a natural on a broom," she said. "Those old retired broomsticks are more than enough for clumsy beginners, but they don't do him justice." The tall witch watched Seamus in the air, the expression in her eyes softening as she saw him finally tasting freedom. Chapter 65, Flight Test. "Mr. Green, excellent work!" Madame Hooch strode toward Chien with a lithe gait, hands on her hips and a sharp curve to her smile, even as she laughed. "You've already mastered a lot of flying technique. Hovering, turning, circling. Those are basic. Today, we'll do something different." A gentle breeze ran across the Quidditch pitch, making the grass bow in the same direction. Chien slid off his broom a little unsteadily. Madame Hooch's hand steadied him. "Good. Take a breather. After that, you'll have to face it." She flicked her wand, and a wooden frame filled with golf balls appeared from the broom shed. Chien watched as she tossed one into the air. It shot up fast and hung there for a heartbeat, clearly under some charm. The tall witch who had been standing beside Madame Hooch a moment before was now nowhere to be seen. Chien quietly produced a potion vial from his bag, gulped its contents with a muffled glug, and returned the empty bottle to his pack. Professor Snape's potion tasted like fruit juice, nothing like the sticky bitterness described in the books. The formula, which Chien hadn't dared to alter, felt like a Bogart tailor-made for him. He could almost picture himself seeing a terrible potion explosion and Snape smirking, "Ridiculous." Madame Hooch had clearly observed the little scene. She raised an eyebrow and looked at the young wizard again, as if detecting something unusual. At that moment, Chien's flying proficiency read, "Flight Technique, Beginner, 1 duty, Advancement, Proficient Flight Technique, unlocks Proficient Flight Title." He thought, the new title should unlock within a few days. The golf balls behaved like weakened quaffles. A witch or wizard charmed them. If you missed one, it would slowly sink toward the ground as though it were in water. Chien would have to snatch them out of the air. Difficult, but not impossible. The wind whistled past his ears as he dove and sliced through the blue like a hawk. He was pushing the broom near its limit. More than once it shuddered, as if on the verge of breaking. Yet Chien remained utterly calm. It wasn't only the old broom being strained, it was his own control and speed testing its limits too. "Astonishing talent," Madame Hooch called as Chien, after a few tries, caught another ball and glided down from the sky, white clouds around him. In only 3 attempts, he had gone from flustered to steady. "Mr. Green, you were born to be a Seeker Star." She watched him for a long moment, her expression complex. Such a good young wizard. Why didn't he like Quidditch? She thought of the sport's darker history. In early days, almost 70% of fouls involved Seekers, and the dirty tricks had been endless. Setting an opponent's broomtail alight, smacking a rival's broom with a bat, even attacking with an axe. Those were only the appetizers. The worst came after. The idea of the wondrous Quidditch balls flashed through Chien's mind. If the snitch rattled, he knew he'd lose focus. "Next week, I'll hold your flight test," Madame Hooch said, hands on her hips, a trace of exasperation in her tone. "First years only get one chance, so remember to bring a new broom. As for the Comet 160, it should be in the broom shed." Madame Hooch left, and Chien was left anxious and puzzled. Where on earth would he find a Firebolt 1500? That afternoon, in the classroom, not a Ravenclaw dared murmur. It was Transfiguration, and Professor Minerva McGonagall kept glancing at Chien for the 3rd time. He was completely focused, wand steady. A mouse became a snuff box, and then slipped back again. His concentration was so intense his face went pale, and he began leafing through Intermediate Transfiguration. He had borrowed the book from the Hogwarts library for 2 galleons. Compared to a beginner's guide to Transfiguration, the only obvious difference was the central bead of the gold-stamped pattern, red on the beginners, green on this one. But the contents were far more advanced. The book detailed spells like turning a teapot into a turtle, how to tell if the turtle's tail would steam when it moved, or whether the shell retained wicker patterns, or transforming a slipper into a white rabbit. The important thing was whether the rabbit's ears were whole. The emphasis was always on turning inanimate objects into living creatures. Professor McGonagall's answer after class confirmed Chien's deduction. Elementary transfiguration transforms inanimate objects into other inanimate objects. Intermediate transfiguration deals with turning inanimate objects into animate ones. Advanced transfiguration is the mutual transformation between two animate beings, turning a turtle into a rabbit, for example. She seemed pleased with his question. An interest in the essence of magic will take you far, Mr. Green. Remember, the more advanced the transfiguration, the more power it needs. Do not attempt it lightly. She handed him a set of notes. Shien read them carefully, took up his wand, and began to practice again. He fixed his gaze on a teapot and tried to imagine the qualities a turtle should possess, guided by McGonagall's instructions. Transfiguration is a dangerous branch of magic. Performing it in front of a professor was safer. If something went wrong and he changed into a badger, the professor could reverse it quickly. McGonagall even told them of a student who had accidentally turned a friend into a badger. Without a counterspell, the change might have been permanent. The fire in the professor's office crackled. Outside, the Quidditch pitch roared, and young wizards played wizard's chess in the corridor. Pieces shouted, "Aha!" and "Get lost!" But inside the little office, Shien practiced until he was exhausted. In his hand, a dark green turtle crawled, small wisps of steam puffing from the base of its tail. A soft chime from the arcane panel registered his achievement. You have practiced an in-depth intermediate transfiguration to apprentice standards, proficiency 50. He reflected. In-depth intermediate transfiguration must mean transforming an inanimate object into a truly living creature. For this level to grant 50 proficiency at apprentice standards, very good. When the turtle reverted back to Teapot, Shien looked at Professor McGonagall with feverish expectation, hardly noticing how pale his face was. "Very good, Mr. Green. A marked improvement," she said, satisfaction in her voice, though her brows tightened almost imperceptibly. Shien didn't catch it. He quietly tidied the office, closed the door, and walked out. The panel updated. Transfiguration, beginner, 800. He lingered on the newly learned theories of transfiguration, the clamor of the other students becoming irrelevant. Professor McGonagall stood by the doorway and watched his retreating figure for a long time, as if she had watched him leave late many nights. "Minerva, you think highly of that child?" a calm voice asked. An old wizard with a long white beard had appeared beside McGonagall without her knowing. "There are no coincidences in this world, Albus," she replied. Her eyes softened, and a quiet pride and tenderness slipped into her expression. "If that child decides to find something, he will find it." Chapter 66, Come to Me. In the corridor, Shien glanced curiously at the portrait of Sir Cadogan. The knight had his back to him and was still struggling to clamber onto his painted pony. From that angle, he looked unhurt. "Little Green, you always look a bit pale," Lady Violet teased. She blinked and, with curiosity, asked, "Is it charms, potions, or transfiguration today?" "Transfiguration," Shien answered honestly. He looked again at Sir Cadogan. From the rear, the knight seemed perfectly fine. Perhaps Professor Snape was unusually lenient with portraits after all. He left the portrait and felt a small relief. Then a stifled, feminine chuckle floated out. "All right then, my dear sir, Little Green has gone." At that, the knight slowly turned. The front of his painting was a different story. The shining breastplate from chest to waist was dented into an ugly curve. The nasal guard of his helm had been knocked to the left. The once proud red ostrich feather was half broken and dripped muddy water limply. His face was a ruin, one eye swollen shut, the other bulging, his beard stuck in clumps with some sticky, slimy substance, and bits of what looked suspiciously like mushroom stuck in it. "What are you staring at?" His voice was hoarse but still loud as he glared at the students outside the frame. "Haven't you seen the medals of victory?" When the other students moved around to see the side of the portrait, they couldn't help but laugh. Sir Cadogan's back was immaculate, his silver blue cloak unsoiled, the velvet smooth, the armor on his back so polished it caught Hermione Granger's frown as she hurried by. Even the sword tassel hanging behind him was meticulously braided and swayed gracefully. Lady Violet laughed until she could barely breathe. "Despicable troll! Ganging up on me!" she crowed. Sir Cadogan growled, and a startled first year fell backward onto the floor. And despicable. The knight peered left and right, muttered a few words under his breath, and then fell silent. With the help of one of Professor Snape's potions, She-En's progress with spells had begun to accelerate. Where once he had needed long rest between practice sessions, he could now recover half his energy in 30 minutes. He raised his wand. Aguamenti! A clean arc of water followed the tip of his wand. It didn't last long, but being able to shape the stream meant his proficiency had improved once again. The little notification in his head was a quiet, mechanical satisfaction. You practiced Aguamenti to a proficient standard, proficiency +10. She-En checked his mental panel. Summoning Charm, Apprentice 3300, Aguamenti Beginner 2900, Levitation Charm, Beginner 200-900. There was hope he could reach Beginner for the Summoning Charm by tomorrow. The thought made his mouth curve. Aguamenti! A clear voice answered, and water appeared at Hermione's wand tip as well. She copied the curve of the arc into her notebook, drawing it precisely while the quill in her other hand trembled slightly. She-En added the pronunciation notes. Later, Hermione lifted her chin at Justin, who was still practicing nearby. "My mother says every stream has its own flow," Justin said with a gentle smile, unbothered by his slow progress. "But guess what? They all run to the sea." Hermione's cheeks warmed, and she turned her head away in embarrassment. "Well, it seems you can manage on your own." "No, my mother meant." Justin lifted his wand as if pleading for help. "Hermione, would you be willing to help a stranded little stream?" She huffed in mock annoyance and moved closer. "Humph, you are impossible." Wednesday evening settled over Hogwarts. The ceiling of the Great Hall reflected a pale purple twilight. Thousands of candles hovered in midair, casting a warm, uneven light. The 4 long tables were lively. First years in pajamas rubbed sleepy eyes and nearly poured pumpkin juice into their oatmeal. 2 Hufflepuffs huddled over Transfiguration notes, jam staining the tips of their hair. A burst of laughter broke out at the Ravenclaw table when someone made a History of Magic textbook tap dance. Owls swooped in from above like a feathered rain, bearing parcels and issues of the Daily Prophet. There were unusually many messenger birds that night. Even at She-En's table, more than 10 owls came and went. He guessed owls must exchange gossip among themselves. Otherwise, why would more owls arrive every time they were fed? He swished his wand. Toast tore apart and nuts and meat pellets flew to the tired birds. Hermione's pile of letters was especially large. As she opened them, she found books, fine quills, and sweets. Her tone was softer than usual, and she busied herself, writing replies. Justin wasn't in the hall. He'd spent the last 2 days in the kitchens. When Hermione had asked him to send an owl with a letter, his bird had brought him a scrap of information he'd not expected to learn. Tomorrow was Hermione's birthday. So Justin had quietly gathered what he could in the kitchens and fretted over what small kindness he might offer. He glanced at She-En and asked casually, "She-En, what about you?" She-En paused, then shook his head. He didn't know. As an orphan, the day he was taken in had become his birthday. The caregiver who'd registered him at the orphanage had long since left. Money had been tight, and the orphanage hadn't celebrated birthdays in years. Knowing the exact date of your birth was a luxury he could not claim. When She-En shook his head, Justin froze for a heartbeat, an unreadable expression passing over his face. Around them, Hermione sorted through her letters. One produced a small plush toy. She frowned, clearly bothered by whatever note accompanied it, but she tucked the toy carefully into her bag as if under some obligation. At She-En's place, the stack of letters was unusually thin. He didn't mind. He was more interested in the practical, whether he could send the twins on a little adventure to procure a broom, whether he could save the few galleons he'd earned toward a Nimbus 1500, and how much the twins might demand for the job. A lively owl, clutching a single envelope, landed directly in front of him. She-En offered the bird a piece of lamb chop, but the owl ignored it and instead placed the letter into his hand. He hesitated only a moment. Hogwarts had taught him to accept strange things with calm, then slit the flap. "Your presence is expected. Come to me, child." Minerva McGonagall. Chapter 67. I have waited too long. The great hall buzzed with noise. Dumbledore's silver beard shimmered in the candlelight, and his eyes, twinkling behind half-moon spectacles, crinkled with pleasure when an owl dropped a bag of sweets and it thumped a Gryffindor on the head. He blinked delightedly, then noticed his best Transfiguration student was no longer at his side. His smile deepened. The greatest white wizard of the age interlaced his fingers and murmured, "Oh, that's good, isn't it? People will find that at Hogwarts, those who need help always receive it." To Shien, the clamor of the hall was already far away. He held a letter and walked down a near-empty corridor. Suits of armor gleamed in the torchlight. The owl on his shoulder ruffled and hooted, urging him along a path he had walked countless times. He didn't notice that the painting of the Lady of the Wheat Fields behind him was packed with spectators. The golden fields rolled under a painted sun like a small ocean. Figures clutching blue cornflowers peered out of the frame, whispering among themselves. "Sir, I'm so excited. That child was so worried today, his sharp brows nearly twisted into a frown," one voice said. Madame Violet clutched the corner of her skirt, watching the young wizard pass with the owl. For a moment, she felt breathless. "Madame Violet, please come help me. My injured hand can't reach my eyes," someone wailed. Sir Cadogan set his pony down and peered eagerly. "You saw that letter? I can't believe it. I've watched little McGonagall's students for 50 years. The fat lady clutched her portrait frame. Sir Cadogan's enthusiasm was cut off. All right, dear. Go and look at that big cat. A knight's attention should only be on little Green." Shien's knock on the wooden door made his hands tremble slightly. He wasn't afraid of Professor Snape, and he felt no prejudice against Professor Quirrell, though a two-headed professor was still hard to believe. It was Professor McGonagall who made him nervous. He could never forget the owl smashing through the orphanage window, the same one now perched on his shoulder. He could never forget the day she had taken him out of the orphanage, the musty beds, the steady dread that life there could end for him at any moment. He remembered how she had pulled him into the warmth and safety of Hogwarts. The Transfiguration office smelled faintly of sandalwood and old parchment. A bright fire roared in the hearth. A long, tightly wrapped parcel rested beside it. Professor McGonagall's dark green robe spread around her chair. A few strands of silver hair caught the firelight. Her eyes, unusually soft, lacked their customary sternness. Her voice, when she spoke, was gentle and steady. "Mr. Green, come here." Shien moved forward obediently, missing the deeper sorrow in her gaze. With a small flick of her wand, the package hovered onto the table before him. "Unwrap it, Mr. Green." He breathed in and, for a moment, thought nothing. When the paper fell away, it revealed a magnificent broom, graceful curves, a glossy mahogany handle, and a long, tidy tail of straight twigs. Lettered in gold on the handle were the words Nimbus 2000. "I don't quite understand, Professor." He didn't leap with excitement. He only spoke quietly, carefully. He wasn't a Gryffindor. He wasn't some chosen savior. 3 months ago, he had been an orphan waiting for his injured body to improve enough to escape Hollies. He knew Professor McGonagall's exterior sternness hid a kind heart, but was he worthy of such generosity? A Nimbus 2000 was no cheap broken broom. It cost more than most could afford in Diagon Alley. From the portrait frame, Sir Cadogan could hardly contain himself. "King Arthur on high!" he shouted, and reached out to tap Shien on the head. The fat lady hissed at him to be quiet. In the firelight, McGonagall's tenderness pushed away Shien's confusion. "Come here, child." Then, gently and unexpectedly, she hugged him. He smelled the comforting, faint scent of her robes. Warmth and a strange, calming certainty wrapped around him. He saw her emerald brooch catch the firelight and heard her say softly, "Mr. Green, there isn't a Transfiguration lesson today. Would you like to tell me about your days at Hogwarts?" Outside, the painting's figures watched and smiled. A knight strode through the painted wheat with 2 ladies, all 3 beaming. Those stern faces sometimes hide surprisingly warm voices. "This trip was worth it," one of them said. The fat lady dabbed at her eyes. Sir Cadogan mumbled, "Coward, coward, even happiness makes him flustered," his voice trailing off into fondness. Madame Hooch was already at the Quidditch pitch, tidying brooms when Shien arrived. She spotted the gleaming new broom and nodded approval. "Nice new broom. Get used to it. Today we'll run a mock trial." Shien nodded and mounted. Only then did he register Madame Hooch's meaning. He took off without the usual hesitant questions. Some of his old caution had fallen away. Hooch watched him with hawk-like intensity, relief showing in the set of her mouth as he rose. She put him through a strict set of drills, weaving through a set of rings, pulling up abruptly over poles, dodging enchanted golf balls sent zipping his way. All of it had to be completed within half an hour. Her voice was crisp and exacting. "Turn, Mr. Green. Pull up. Stay focused. Adjust your posture. Only proficiency will save you from the kinds of flying dangers that happen at Hogwarts." Inside the staff common room, where the fire burned bright, two professors watched the scene unfold from a painting. The tall witch's eyes followed the pitch with an expression that balanced sternness and care. Beside her, the kind wizard with the long white beard regarded her from his armchair with a teasing sparkle in his eyes. "Minerva," he said gently, "you haven't shown this much concern for a child in a very long time." She looked at him as if looking at a fragile, newly sprouted thing that had finally broken through the soil. Her robes still bore the crease of worry. She smiled, faint and full of something like relief. "You don't understand, Albus," she replied. "He smiled and told me so many things. I feel as though I have waited a very long time for this." 68. Neville Longbottom. You practiced flying at an expert standard, proficiency 50. A new flying domain title has been unlocked. By the time he left the Quidditch pitch, his flying skill had advanced beyond entry-level to skilled. Sheehan opened his system panel without thinking. Title: Intermediate Flyer. Greatly increases perception of magic within flying brooms, greatly enhances flying talent, slightly increases short-term explosive power while flying. Holding the Nimbus 2000 felt unreal. The thing he'd long wished for had come into his hands in a way that still struck him as unbelievable. Professor McGonagall's warmth reminded him of the elderly woman who used to visit the orphanage and bring pudding to him during hospital stays. He respected her, just as he had respected that kindly woman. For a moment, Hogwarts really did feel like home. In the corridor, a strange sound stopped him, the soft, broken sobbing of a boy. In the dimness at the end of the passage, Neville Longbottom was curled into himself, back against the cold stone. The rough wall rubbed through his robes, but he hardly felt it. A sharper pain was squeezing his chest and choking his throat. Hot tears ran down his face. He bit his lip until it hurt, trying to stifle the shameful noises, but all he tasted was salt and a deeper shame. The scene from yesterday's charms class replayed in his head. He had fumbled his words, and the levitation charm had erupted in a blinding flare, shooting straight at Professor Flitwick. Neville had watched in horror as the tiny professor was sent sailing like a feather, bumping into the bookshelf while quills and parchment rained down. The world had seemed to freeze. When Professor Flitwick picked himself up, he only brushed the dust from his robes and said nothing. But that patient tolerance weighed on Neville like a stone. He didn't deserve such kindness. He was an idiot, unable to do the simplest spells and liable to hurt his teachers, just like those Slytherins had said. His shoulders shook. He buried his face in his knees and tried not to make a sound. Footsteps approached hesitantly along the empty corridor and stopped nearby. Neville held his breath, wishing he could disappear. After a few moments, the newcomer crouched down. "Longbottom," a voice said. Michael was holding a book. He had things to do, but seeing Neville like this, he couldn't just walk away. Mistakes in charms happen all the time. Professor Flitwick said nothing about it, didn't he? Neville almost started sobbing again. Michael, flustered, babbled on. "It's just charms." "Fine, I'll tell you a secret. Go down this corridor to the spiral staircase between the second and third floors. Wait at the end of the first landing, and you'll find how Mr. Finch Fletchley has been improving so quickly." He smacked his forehead, annoyed with himself. This was a trick he'd worked out from watching. He had meant to go himself to surprise Jean. "What?" Neville couldn't think straight. "Just go." Michael shoved a folded note into Neville's hand. "Don't look at it yet." Then, with one last, hurried instruction, he left Neville staring at the paper. The note read, "Jean, please teach him. Your charms level is the highest. I've noticed Mr. Longbottom just lacks confidence. With you, the top student right now, I guarantee he'll learn the levitation charm in 30 minutes. I'm willing to give all my pudding for this. Your devoted?" Sheehan, standing at the junction of two corridors, had heard the whole thing. He altered his route to the classroom silently. Michael had messed up the details at the end, but the point was clear. is that Jian had often heard the Slytherins mock Neville, and Neville wasn't particularly popular in Gryffindor either, but his magical talent didn't look weak. When Neville thanked him, voice trembling, "Thank you, Mr. Green. Thank you, and Michael too." His eyes were wet, as if Jian had performed some great miracle. In reality, Xian had only given him notes and highlighted a few key points, and Neville had managed the levitation charm. They didn't even make it to the end of the second corridor before it worked. Jian didn't notice the two pairs of eyes peeking through the crack in the sky-blue door as Neville left grateful and buoyed. He pushed open the classroom door and, glancing around, remarked casually, "Changing seats is fine too." Justin and Hermione, who had hurriedly sat down, jumped up and flushed as they returned to their places, embarrassed. Sheen chastised himself for being flustered, then carried on with charms practice. "Accio, quill," he intoned. The quill rose smoothly into his hand. "You practiced the summoning charm at a skilled standard, proficiency plus 10. You practiced the summoning charm at a skilled standard, proficiency 10. Sheen slumped back into his chair and swallowed a potion. He opened the system panel again. Summoning charm, entry level 300. Aguamenti, entry level 2900. Levitation charm, entry level 200-900. Now he only needed to grind the levitation charm proficiency up to meet Professor Flitwick's standards. He glanced at the rough wooden stool and imagined making it float, but before he could try again, the first afternoon lesson was about to begin. It was Wednesday. Ravenclaw's first class after lunch was herbology. The greenhouse was quiet now. The clusters of younger students had dispersed long ago. Even among the Hufflepuffs, few kept up the tedious, repetitive work for long. Magical plants don't grow overnight. Once the novelty wears off, enthusiasm rarely lasts to the end. Following certain attacking the professor incidents, even Neville, who used to linger in the greenhouse, was absent. Professor Sprout looked at the empty greenhouse and for the first time in a while, disappointment crossed her usually gentle face. Chapter 69, Staying Behind. The corridor outside the greenhouse smelled faintly of damp earth and plant sap. A woman in an evening gown tilted her head as 3 Hufflepuffs passed, eyeing them curiously. "Want some gingerbread?" she asked. Pister suddenly produced several gingerbread cookies wrapped in tin foil from his bag. Bruce stepped back about 10 meters, holding his hand over his nose. "Sometimes I think you don't have a sense of smell, Pister," he complained. "We've been processing southern ginger powder for 3 days. The smell's making me a little sick. How can you still eat gingerbread?" "It's fine," Pister said, unfazed, and popped a cookie into his mouth. Leon took a bite as well, expression unchanged. "Also, that's a sense of smell, you know," he added. Bruce blinked, then slowly put it together. "So I spent 3 days working with you two who couldn't smell anything, and I was the one suffering." Pister grinned. "What spell did you expect?" "An invisible bubblehead charm," Leon said dryly. "My heads looked bigger?" Bruce blinked. "Merlin, you didn't tell me. You just watched me suffer. If you hadn't put itching powder in our hats and—" Pister began, but Bruce cut in with a sheepish, "Hey, stop, I was wrong." "It's the same pattern every year," Bruce said, as if noticing it for the first time. "By the 4th week, the greenhouse empties out again." He leaned toward the two holding a book and a potted plant, respectively. "Want to make a bet?" "No bet," Leon said. "Are you scared?" Bruce teased, striking an indignant pose. Leon sighed, knowing he would be nagged all day if he refused. "Fine, what are we betting on?" "That after today the greenhouse will have 1 more Ravenclaw assistant," Bruce said. "And the stake?" Leon asked. "Help me with something during Hogsmeade week," Bruce said. "Deal." Leon shrugged. Bruce walked off triumphantly with an "Aha!" Leon turned to Pister. "Looks like we've got 1 more thing to do during Hogsmeade week." Pister nodded, cradling his potted plant. His smile was honest and easy. Inside the greenhouse, the air was always alive with the fresh scent of soil and leaves. Sunlight filtered through the glass dome in a soft, even glow that made every leaf look luminous. Professor Sprout, round and animated as ever, held up a cluster of ginger roots for the class. "Ginger is a rhizome with a stimulating aroma," she explained. "It's used in many potions. It can be an ingredient in swelling solution. It's used in wit-sharpening potions, beauty potions, and of course in culinary treats like ginger newt biscuits and gingerbread. The students listened intently as she displayed the roots and demonstrated the proper way to clean and prepare them. A nearby Slytherin whispered in disbelief, "Ginger newt biscuits come from that?" After the practical demonstration, Sprout led everyone to another specimen, a shriveled pearl-white bean that looked like an enlarged mistletoe berry. "All right, can anyone tell me what this is?" she asked, smiling. The Ravenclaws and Slytherins alike flipped through their textbooks. They all consulted Spore's 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi, the standard text at Hogwarts despite its author having passed in 1408. Even Sheehan thought he remembered a portrait of Spore in the headmaster's office. "Superphorus bean," one Ravenclaw answered. "It has many magical properties and is used in potions. But beware, the silvery juice of the bean, if consumed, will erase a person's memory." Sheehan felt an odd familiarity watching the scene unfold. Herbology class finished in the usual clamor, and the greenhouse slowly became messy again, soil tracked on the paths, footprints marking the way. Professor Sprout watched the students stream out, but a handful usually lingered. Today, the room felt emptier than usual. An owl hooted as it passed outside, and a small figure slipped to the front of Sprout's skirt. "Professor, can I stay and help?" Sheehan asked, gloves in his hands, emerald eyes bright. "Of course, my dear Mr. Green. The greenhouse always welcomes a child who loves nature," Professor Sprout replied, her smile warmer than usual. "Come, let's tidy up. Then I'll show you how to process southern ginger." Sprout was enthusiastic. Cleaning the greenhouse improved proficiency with the scouring charm, and processing southern ginger increased herbology knowledge. Sheehan was eager for another reason. Southern ginger powder was an ingredient for swelling solution, and he planned to brew that potion tonight. At Hogwarts, the professor's supplies spoke volumes. Professor Snape's store of rare ingredients, African tree snakeskin, gillyweed, made it easy to imagine how comfortably well off he was. That wealth was one reason Sheehan studied potions so diligently. Potions were profitable, quick, and the best route to earning galleons with magical skill. Sometimes he wondered if Snape's robes had undetectable extension charms stitched into them. How else could one account for an endless supply of expensive ingredients? Good material conditions made Sheehan's studies steadier, while his own life felt rather unstable. He'd recently lost a notebook, one an ordinary student would use for a term, but which hadn't even lasted 3 weeks in his care. Learning herbology processing was a practical step toward better potions and more stable income. Top-tier potions like Felix Felicis fetched hundreds of galleons and were rare. Mastering ingredients felt like the sensible first step. As he worked, the little progress notifications popped up in his mind like a familiar game interface. "You have completely processed a southern ginger plant to apprentice standards. Proficiency 1. You have completely processed a southern ginger plant to apprentice standards. Proficiency." By sunset, when Sheehan left the greenhouse, the panel refreshed again. Herbology knowledge, apprentice level. Advancement, novice herbology knowledge can unlock novice title in herbology field. In total, processing southern ginger and other plants had added 33 proficiency to his record. He stepped out into the corridor and saw 3 figures, those same Hufflepuffs, emerging slowly down the hall. Chapter 70, the letter Shi, and ran through his notes in his head. Professor Sprout had not only taught him how to process southern ginger, but also how to work with wood sorrel, bush artemisia, and aloe vera juice. All of them were ingredients for swelling solution, and that gave him confidence about tonight's brew. With the improved ritual and will guidance, he could at least manage a proficient-level swelling solution. Proficient, right after learning. The thought lightened his step as he crossed the corridor. There's still a month until Hogsmeade Week. Actually, it's the only place in Britain without muggles, a familiar voice mused. Senior Leon replied. Sheehan saw who it was. "What are you planning to buy at Honeyduke's this time?" Leon raised an eyebrow. "If you dare to buy broom polish in there again, go buy yourself." "Heh." Sheehan smiled, guessing the rest. "It's got everything. Pepper imps, eat them and smoke comes out of your mouth. Chocolate frogs with strawberry cream and plain cream, and those quill-shaped sweets you'd suck on in class when Professor McGonagall wasn't looking, until she chucked you out." Leon glanced down at Senior Bruce and added, "But if you go in and ask for broom polish and they won't give it to you, you'd secretly sprinkle itching powder on people." Shien's eyes widened. All right, all right. It's not like I didn't give them an antidote, and it's not like I didn't get chased with a broom. The weather's really nice today. Oh, Shien. Senior Bruce, as if he'd been keeping an eye out, turned and waved. Leon fell silent, muttering, "Then what about the beating Peaster and I took?" Shien greeted the three seniors politely. The bell rang for meals just then, and as he was about to head to the Great Hall, Bruce called after him with a grin. "You wouldn't believe how much time we spent dealing with the mess those younger students caused while you were away. I often think they're better at trouble than I ever was." Bruce blinked, and the others, Leon and Pister, nodded vigorously, though it was hard to say which part they agreed with. Bruce produced 3 ice creams, chocolate, raspberry, and crushed nut, from somewhere, and pressed them into Shien's hand. Then, leaning close, he whispered conspiratorially, "I won a bet on you. The Hufflepuff Handbook, sharing joy is an important part of sharing." Puzzled but amused, Shien entered the Great Hall with the 3 ice creams. He always suspected Bruce was hiding something, but given Bruce's Honeyduke's misadventures, buying broom polish and lobbing itching powder when things went wrong, Shien knew he was better off not trying to guess. In the Great Hall, Hermione sat hunched over the table, writing a letter with an expression that flickered between worry and joy. More notebooks and sweets lay beside her, fresh deliveries, apparently. "Shien? She said, then pressed one of the ice creams into her hand and murmured, "Delicious." Shien handed one to Justin, who still looked a little dazed from a stint in the kitchens. Hermione stared at the ice cream for a beat, gave a small sigh of relief, and said, "Last time, you didn't have any notebooks left." She finished in one breath, and then, almost apologetically, began stacking a small mountain of notebooks in front of Shien's roast chicken. The common room fire threw a warm glow across the hall as Hermione murmured, "You brought too few. I happen to have extras," and then buried herself back in her letter, not looking up. Shien blinked, then noticed the notebooks had "Tough to Miss Hermione Granger" written on them, and that all the blank pages inside had been torn out. Hermione had been preparing for something for a while. When Justin had asked CN in class what else Hermione might like, CN had thought for a long time before answering, comprehensive notes for Hogwarts' 7 main subjects. "Merlin." Justin clutched his forehead. Then, with belated clarity, he admitted, "All right, I can't believe I'm saying this. You were right, Shien." So Shien went back to the classroom for a while to sort things out with Justin. They spent the time tidying and packaging the notes. Justin kept assuring him, repeatedly, that Hermione wouldn't come into the classroom today. Shien didn't ask how Justin was making sure of that. Down the corridor, Harry was quietly arranging with Hedwig to slip a letter about the Gringotts robbery in with the other messenger owl's deliveries to Hermione. Shien, full of purpose, turned the corner with his bag full of notes. He hadn't expected Professor McGonagall to appear flying past on a broom, nor had he expected Hermione to be the one with the scarce notebooks. He reached into his bag and took out a yellowed piece of paper from the very bottom, something the kind old woman from the orphanage had slipped to him once in secret. By the time he opened it, the second week later, he learned that the woman had passed away. The paper was thick, tough like old parchment. The neat, fading handwriting read, "Dear, life always turns towards something better when you least expect it. That's my little secret. Keep doing things, even the smallest ones, and the wheels of fate will start to turn. My dear child, you must believe that. Forever yours." Milan, a pressed violet, had been tucked into the corner of the page. He smoothed it carefully, slipped the letter back into his bag, and descended into the dungeons. The dungeons were cold and dim. Candles threw trembling shadows over rows of glass jars, odd organs floating and turning slowly in viscous liquid. Professor Snape's black robe swept across the flagstones like a bat's wing. His presence made the room drop a few degrees. Shien set his notebook down beside the cauldron. Between each brewing step, he recorded his observations, continually correcting and refining his method. It had become a habit. A draft turned the notebook to a page dense with writing. "Snape, outwardly indifferent to Xian's brewing, let his cold gaze sweep across what was visible. He stopped on a single line, and his expression sharpened. The few words that caught his eye were unexpected and out of place. Use of Nimbus 2000. Chapter 71. Notes. The warmth of the cauldron could not hide Professor Snape's icy rage. The word Nimbus 2000 acted like a key, snapping open a chest of memories full of humiliation, jealousy, and helplessness. When his eyes fell again on that foolish broom, a sharp surge of betrayal and scorn rose in him. He almost spat the most venomous sarcasm, imagined smashing the broom and all the sordid memories attached to it. Xian worked methodically at the bench, oblivious to Snape's murderous stare. Professor Sprout had just shown him how to prepare galangal powder, wood sorrel, mugwort, and aloe vera juice. If he didn't concentrate and follow his notes exactly, he would miss small but crucial steps. He consulted his parchment by the light of a tiny magically lit candle. When he glanced up, he met Snape's frigid gaze, but he barely registered it and turned back to finish the wood sorrel. He reviewed each motion in his mind, trying to find where he had gone wrong last time. To most students, Snape was unbearable. He taught as if demanding doctoral work from children who had just left primary school. What seemed obvious to him read like indecipherable script to the average witch or wizard. For the majority of the school, his very name inspired fear. But to Xian, Snape could be considered an excellent professor. Xian chopped the wood sorrel carefully. The plant had a pale pink tinge and a faint vinegar scent. It was sometimes called wood sorrel because it resembled the physalis of lantern grass. In the wizarding world, it had several uses in potions. Seeing the student return to his meticulous brewing calmed something in Snape's green eyes. Complex emotions flickered there, but after watching Xian work a long while only to produce substandard material once, Snape could no longer hold back. "Idiot," he snapped. "If you put those half-ground, weakly juiced ingredients into my cauldron again, get out of my dungeons." Xian set aside the ingredients he had almost added and reprocessed them, following Snape's instructions to the letter. Snape's stare grew almost clinical. He could never tolerate anything that linked noble potions with that filthy sport. Nimbus 2000, brewing potions, making money, his mind drew the inevitable and ugly conclusion. An orphan with no income, obsessed with the most expensive broom, planning to brew potions to sell so he could buy it. How vulgar, how pitiable. He could not help a cold laugh building in his chest. Heh! How utterly pathetic for an orphan. Before he could finish, Xian put his notes down and added the final ingredients. The cauldron boiled over, flames leaping and distorting the air and Snape's shadow. A rush of heat turned a page of Xian's book, and a line of text caught Snape's eye. The Nimbus 2000 demonstrated excellent emergency turning capabilities during the morning flight test. The trick to this control does not depend on the waist and abdomen, but on mental guidance of the second set of spells on the left rear side. It is almost identical to the final step of guiding a potion. As expected, magic is connected by a single source line. Snape's next insult died in his throat. "Hopeless heat. I suppose your trollish brain cannot comprehend the beauty of a slow simmer over low flame. Then learn the note on the bottom left of page 63 of the Book of Potions. When swelling solution boils, the heat should be 1 time the normal amount." Xian seemed to ignore the scolding. He adjusted the heat with precise timing. The bubbles in the cauldron churned and burst, white smoke rising in a beguiling aroma. He thought of the book he had been reading. The Book of Potions was by Zygmunt Polacki, the famous potions master who had left Hogwarts. Polacki had been the best student in his potions class at 14, correcting teachers' mistakes when making draughts with soft-clawed land shrimp tails. He had asked the headmaster's permission to enter the magical school's potions championship, but the headmaster had refused because he was not yet 17. Angry at being restrained, Polacki had left the school, convinced Hogwarts wanted to stifle his potential. What stayed with Xian most were the anecdotes from Polacki's time at Hogwarts. One rival had spilled a love potion on himself and subsequently fell in love with the potions teacher. Later, whenever a laughing potion required loud, uncontrollable mirth, that memory would surface. The story seemed trivial, but Xian noticed something deeper. If a laughing potion could require a specific emotional response, perhaps other potions also needed the brewer's emotions. Maybe Master Lebatius Borgia's ritual was not the final aim, but a method of focus, a way to strengthen belief. Potions, like spells, might demand refined emotional input. The desire behind a levitation charm, the yearning for light in a lumos, these were expressions of the same single source of magic. In the firelight, Snape's face cleared of its hard anger. His body melted back into the dungeon shadows. CN Green already had a broom. Its origin didn't matter. What mattered was that he loved potions, a fact confirmed by Snape's own observations and by Palaki's notes. Those who did not love potions could never have those particular annotations. What right had Snape to doubt him? The memory of his earlier unalterable remark twisted his reason again, and today's scene felt like a replay. She-en. Snape's black robes shifted, and his cold voice cut the dungeon air. Perhaps you'd care to explain, what foolish acrobatics do you intend with that idiotic broom? Outside, the cauldron gurgled. Late sun streamed through a crack in the stone, casting light on the flagstones and curling in the moss like a cocoon. The spiders that had lived here under the dungeon's perpetual gloom seemed, in that moment, as if exposed to sunlight for the first time. Chapter 72. Conflict in the Corridor. In the dungeons, Professor Snape's sullen gaze slid toward a corner. She-en couldn't see. The truth before him was so simple it felt almost mocking. There was no conspiracy, no greed, only the clumsy efforts of a scrawny young wizard trying to pursue his studies. Verifying that truth was equally simple, and Snape stood quiet for a long time, thinking. She-en watched him, thoughtful. He looked down at the open notebook, and in an instant understood what had happened. Quidditch, of all things, had been a sensitive subject for Snape. She-en had simply never noticed. He replayed his own recent odd behavior in his mind, and realized it all began that warm afternoon when Professor McGonagall had smiled and listened to him talk at length. Next time, he decided, he would bring a new notebook. At that moment, the swelling solution reached its final stage. She-en did not hesitate. He used the improved ritual. Immersed in the viscous potion, body and mind tuned to the magic in the cauldron, he guided the subtle currents to merge. The text on the side of the cauldron glowed. You have successfully brewed a pot of swelling solution to the standard of a proficiency plus 10. She-en went pale, then moved quickly. He decanted the potion into a crystal vial and doused the flame. Before leaving the dungeons, he counted his remaining galleons, 10 paused, then carefully dropped 7 galleons into Professor Snape's hand. You've given too much, Professor, he said. Common quality swelling solution doesn't fetch more than 5 galleons on the market. He began packing his small bag. The black satchel was faded, its edges grayish-white, as if bleached by the sun. Thin cracks revealed the lighter fibers beneath. It was the bag his grandmother Milan had given him, and he'd used it until now. She-en reviewed his plan in silence. His aguamenti and summoning charms were still at the introductory level. Next on the list was levitation. He had to master it within the week. There was only a little more than a week until the end of the month. Time was tight, but manageable. He could cast a dozen proficient-level levitation charms in one go, and with Snape's recovery potion to study alongside, he could gain no less than 600 proficiency in a day. Proficient level required 900. He guessed expert would be under 3,000. If he spent whole days immersed in spells and potions, 900 a day seemed attainable. The quick notes quill fluttered and wrote his calculations. What She-en didn't notice was the shadow not far behind him, a gloomy-faced wizard watching quietly. Snape only wanted to verify the young man's words. When that was done, he slipped back into the shadows. At the other end of the corridor, Hermione hurried past the slightly quieter portraits, a letter clutched in her hand, heading toward the suit of armor. She had been hurrying ever since Harry's earnest explanation about Cerberus that morning, how the package might be dangerous and, if it was connected to Dumbledore, how those two could jeopardize the headmaster's plans. If that was true, Harry had said they should be stopped. Hermione had agreed they should talk. A strange sound from ahead made her look up. Theodore Nott and his friends were coming down the corridor. Seeing him, Hermione remembered Charms class that morning. Professor Flitwick had asked a difficult question. Both she and Theodore raised their hands. Flitwick called on her and awarded Gryffindor a point. Theodore had glared resentfully and kept competing to be noticed. When he was called on later, he'd been unable to answer and had stood there awkwardly. "Oh, look who it is," Theodore drawled now, smirking. "Arrogant Miss Granger, fresh from the library to answer the next question nobody asked you?" Two Slytherins behind him snickered. "If you spent your time reviewing the standard book of spells instead of loitering in the corridor, you mightn't have looked like a popped slug today." Hermione crossed her arms and tried to keep her voice calm, though her haste made it sharper than she intended. Theodore's face darkened, and he stepped closer. "You think you're so great, don't you? Just because Flitwick favors you bookworms, especially you." He scanned her with a sneer, hunting for an insult. "Say another word, and I swear I'll—" Before he could finish, Justin stepped around the corner. He stood alone in front of Hermione, facing the three Slytherins with cold eyes. Theodore hesitated, startled by Justin's presence. Then scorn reappeared on his face when he saw Justin was alone. "Mud, blood," Theodore began, the slur cutting through the corridor. Hermione's cheeks flamed with anger. Before Theodore could finish the insult, Justin's fist connected with his face, distorting it. Theodore staggered to the floor, blood gushing from his nose. "You actually dare," he yelled. Justin's voice echoed down the corridor. "My mother told me that for trash like you, who have neither courage nor decency, force brings equality. And my father taught me I can handle 3 rotten worms." Before the other Slytherins could react, Justin struck Theodore again, leaving him dazed. The 2 remaining Slytherins raised their wands, but then their wands lifted from their hands as if by unseen force. "Wingardium Leviosa," a voice commanded. Their wands floated up into the air. Justin blinked in surprise and then shouted, "Shien!" Shien stepped forward, having come up quietly. "Oh, Shien," one of the Slytherins muttered, suddenly uneasy. "We seem to have broken school rules," Justin added. Shien glanced at the 3 boys, then pulled the still angry Hermione away. She had her wand half raised, eyes wary on the 2 remaining Slytherins. "Let's go," he urged. They moved quickly, because a man in black robes had emerged from the shadows. His gaze was cold and murderous. Chapter 73, The Fireplace. Mudblood. What does that mean? In the corridor, 3 young wizards threw fleeting shadows in the torchlight. Outside the window, the pale pink and indigo sky was shrouded in a thin mist. Birdsong always seemed loud at dusk. "I don't know," Justin answered honestly. Hermione looked at Cien helplessly. "I wasn't asking you, Justin. Do you know?" "It's a very insulting term in the wizarding world for muggleborns," Cien said. "How serious is it?" Justin asked suddenly. "Very," Cien replied. Justin fell quiet for a moment, then spun around muttering, "Going to Eton next year wouldn't be so bad. Mother would be proud of me." Cien and Hermione moved to pull him back. "There's no need to go anywhere," Cien said softly. His voice had a way of cutting through hesitation. Justin stopped and asked, half to himself, "Is this because of Professor Snape?" Mentioning Snape made Justin's voice lower. For any Slytherin who had broken one of Professor Snape's iron rules, Shien could picture the potions master's wrath. He pulled Hermione and Justin away quickly. Compared to a squabble among the 6 young wizards, Professor Snape's private handling of such matters was far more terrifying. Hogwarts had rules, but when the head of a house decided something wasn't on the record, the rules could be bent into nothing. If they stayed, they might hinder Snape or be held responsible. If they left, the incident would likely be turned into a private Slytherin affair by the potions master. They slipped away. Rain lashed the windows. The sky outside was ink dark. Inside, however, the classroom was bright and warm. Magic lanterns glowed, and 3 cups of hot milk steamed on a small wooden table. Hermione, looking a little down, was bending over a letter, quill scratching softly. Out of respect for her privacy, Justin kept his distance, moving closer to Cien instead. Shien, meanwhile, was still mapping out his plan. "Whether I get the scholarship depends on this last week or so," he said. "First, I need to raise the levitation charm to an expert level, then learn smokescreen and the knockback jinx. 3 spells a first year should have for defense against the dark arts. That should put me at an outstanding in Dieta, and the Galleons will cover me for years." He paused, writing in his notebook. "Hogwarts isn't always safe. The prejudice among the purebloods is real. If it weren't, 2 generations of the Dark Lord wouldn't have gathered so many followers. I need to learn something stronger." At the thought of stronger magic, Xian's mind immediately went to Transfiguration. Dark arts might be the most destructive, but Transfiguration was elegant and profound. It could give life and purpose to otherwise ordinary things. He thought of Dumbledore at the Ministry, animating golden statues to defend and protect. Transfiguration could turn the tide in a fight. It suited Xian's talents. He scribbled Transfiguration at the top of his plan and had the quick notes quill sweep across the page as he allocated the rest of his time. Transfiguration and spellwork would take priority. Potions and herbology would be reduced. "Oh," he heard Justin's stifled laugh and turned. Justin was reading a little note and giggling, which made Hermione blush, burying her face in her letter. "You've got to be careful not to be discovered," Justin said, and slipped a folded scrap into Xian's hand. The crude handwriting read, "I wanted to say, thank you for helping me, Xian." "Don't let anyone find out," Justin whispered, then glanced toward the door. Hermione had left the classroom in a rush, cheeks flushed, and the door had slammed behind her. "You've been caught," Xian smiled. "So how will you apologize now?" Justin, suddenly confident, shot back. "Don't worry. Father taught me 100 ways. Every one of them works." He eased the door open on the hinges and peered down the corridor to make sure Hermione had gone. "Remember," he said, "Hogwarts has a lot of doors. If you don't politely ask one to open or poke the right spot, some of them won't open at all. Some doors are just walls that look like doors." He walked to a particular stretch of stone and then said, almost ceremoniously, "Lard." A moment later, a door gelled with a ripple of flame appeared and vanished, revealing a fireplace with a bright, steady fire. The glow picked out 7 soft armchairs arranged around it. Justin stood there, proud of himself, as if he'd summoned a whole room into being. "Mr. Owl told me about this," Justin said. "A fireplace isn't much by itself, but what if it's linked to the Flu network?" He brightened at the thought. Flu powder was a common means of communication and travel. You could put part of yourself, your head for example, into the flames and speak to someone far away without going there physically. Imagine seeing your family on your birthday when you're miles away, or having friends with you, even if they're not really there. "You must have worked on this for a long time," Xian said. Justin shrugged. "Not really. My mother's wizarding friends and a few owls did most of the work. I just had to contact Hermione's parents," and he stopped, a little embarrassed. "You did well, Justin. Hermione will be very happy." Firelight danced in Xian's eyes. "You should rest," he said quietly. "Leave the rest to me." Justin fell suddenly silent, then nodded. He looked exhausted. Contacting people in distant places took planning. Someone would have to watch the fireplace on Thursday, or the surprise could turn awkward. Seeing how tired Justin was, Xian thought he ought to get some proper sleep. Justin agreed, and with a small, grateful grin, he settled into one of the armchairs, finally ready to rest. Chapter 74. Madame Norris Hermione had a wonderful birthday. There was no doubt about that. When her parents' faces appeared in the flow, she was so overwhelmed she nearly cried. Xian and Justin had respectfully given them space, waiting just outside the classroom. Xian with a book, Justin nervously chattering. After a while, Hermione's soft voice called them in. Her parents looked at the 2 boys with nothing but tenderness, praising Justin until he blushed. Xian was equally affected. Hermione unwrapped her presents under the watching eyes of the Grangers. Justin had given her moon charts and some astronomical instruments, everything she needed for her current astronomy homework. Xian gave her his own compiled notes. Hermione would freely admit that Xian's notes were lifesavers on weekends. Systematic, scientific, and interesting, they were far easier to learn from than the dry, vague textbooks. His near-perfect history of magic was already being copied and passed around among the students. That night, Hermione found a scrap of paper tucked on top of the notes. She waited until her roommates were asleep and then read it carefully. "I want to say, Hermione, no matter what others think, your value doesn't change because of it. I know you know this, but please let me say it again. Your friend, Xian Green." The note almost brought her to tears. Spending that special time together had clearly drawn them closer. The bond between the three of them in that classroom had grown noticeably tighter. At the same time, both Justin and Hermione noticed that Chien seemed even busier than before. He left early, returned late, collapsed from exhaustion in the common room, took some odd potion, and then collapsed again. But his transfiguration and levitation charms were getting stronger by the day. Justin had personally seen Chien make classroom chairs float and transform a pebble into a tiny stone figure clutching a sharp object. It could take only 2 steps, but it worked. In Transfiguration class, Chien once turned a desk into half of a wild boar with vicious tusks. He slumped onto the stool within 2 seconds, but the sudden snort and charge had startled the Slytherins passing by outside the classroom. Goyle had no desire to imagine being gored by that boar. Theodore, who had been plotting revenge and was now in detention, silently abandoned his idea. No dancing spell of his seemed worth the risk. On a bright Saturday, owls still brought the usual letters. Justin received a gold-edged envelope and opened it to find Madame Finch-Fletchley's handwriting. Dear Justin, I read your letter and saw those memorable moments you described. I am so pleased you have such good friends. Cherish them. After all, those who are gentle and true often find life hard because the world is neither gentle nor fair. Always proud of you, Liliana. Justin carefully put the letter away and glanced toward the fireplace, remembering a conversation he'd had with Chien earlier. Chien, there's a fireplace here, and it's connected to the Flu network, if you... I have no one to contact, Chien had said, then gone straight back to practicing Transfiguration. The great hall buzzed with students eating, playing, arguing, and doing homework. Justin leaned close to Hermione and spoke quietly. Hermione, did you notice? Aside from that letter, Chien never seems to get any mail. Hermione paused, flicked a subtle nonverbal charm with her wand, and gave a small, resigned smile. I know, she said. Both of them saw the same heaviness cross each other's faces. Chien's training had reached a frustrating crossroads. Before his levitation charm reached proficient level, practicing at the entry-level standard had granted him +3 proficiency each time. But now that the skill itself was proficient, practicing at the entry standard only gave him +1. Practicing at the proficient standard gave +3. Only expert-level practice still yielded the large 50 gains. The insights he gained from lower-level practice had thinned out. The easier exercises were no longer teaching him the subtler parts of the spell. He could feel how much more there was to learn, but the fragments of understanding he found were fewer and farther between. It pushed him toward more advanced techniques, but it also squeezed his time tighter and tighter. To make progress toward expert-level levitation within the week, he had to cut back drastically on time in the dungeons and in the Transfiguration office. After learning that Neville had returned and that Senior Bruce was often in the greenhouse, he even asked Professor Sprout for a few days off. Saturday afternoon, Chien walked out of the Transfiguration office looking pale. He had pushed himself to the limit these past few days, and it had worked, up to a point. Name, Chien, Green Proficiency Summoning Charm, Entry Level, 3/900. Aguamenti, Entry Level, 2/900. Levitation Charm, Proficient Level, 1200 Nars 3000. The proficient standard for levitation was no longer enough. He needed a way to reach expert. As he reviewed his charms notes, one of Professor Flitwick's remarks caught his eye. If you can make a feather spin, why not try it on that little table? When you barely learn the spells required for first years, you will find there are still mysteries of nonverbal spells waiting for you. Knowledge is never too much. Nonverbal spells, he murmured to himself. That was one avenue. Potions, however, remained a sore point. Professor Snape had grown even stricter. Oddly, Snape's instruction had increased while his sarcasm had decreased, a change that produced an unfortunate side effect. Chien barely had time to test any of his theories about the emotions of potions. Still, he had managed to complete the proficient-level swelling solution. When he finally walked out of the dungeons, he silently congratulated himself. He had survived Professor Snape's hellish regimen once more, and yet he looked around and sighed. He, who had memorized every school rule, had gone out at night like this. Misfortunes never came alone. As he stepped away from the dungeon entrance, a soft meow sounded at his neck, cutting through the owl's hooting. He bent his head and saw two lamp-like yellow eyes watching him. It was Madame Norris. Normally, Chien bore the caretaker's cat goodwill. Madame Norris was sprightly and, in her own way, endearing. But today, everything felt different. Chapter 75, Forced Night Tour. Hogwarts rules were written down in exhausting detail across its long history, but the most important rule never appeared in any book, namely, that a rule is only a rule until someone enforces it. Corridor. Madame Norris hopped up onto a step, all lean angles and quick motion, her dark gray fur flashing in the moonlight. Chien could hear his own heart hammering in his ears, loud enough to have woken the portraits if they weren't napping. Moonlight slashed in through the high, narrow windows, painting pale patches on the stone floor, as though ghosts might leap out from any one of them. Night tours were strictly forbidden. It was practically a Gryffindor tradition to sneak about at night, but that didn't stop the professors from punishing anyone caught. Anne remembered how Harry and his friends had been found after returning from the Forbidden Forest. Filch had caught them and reported them to Professor McGonagall. They'd lost 150 points between them and been given detention. Losing points didn't matter much to Chien. He could earn them back. Detention was different. Detention meant being kept by a professor for chores and tasks that ate up time he could not afford to waste. His breathing grew heavier as a flurry of thoughts crowded his mind. If he got detention, nearly a month's work would be ruined. What could he do to avoid it? Wind sighed through the windows like a turning point, sudden and fragile. After a soft meow, Madame Norris padded up to him. Even Filch's cat could show affection. "Oh, well then," Chien murmured. He remembered 3 days earlier, near the dungeons, when a group of Gryffindors had been harassing Madame Norris. Filch was hated by many students. They would have loved to kick his cat just to spite him. Chien had watched until the boys moved on. "Thank you, Madame Norris," he whispered. As if remembering a favor, he took from his bag the little box of dried fish Justin had given him. Madame Norris leaned into his hand, and he couldn't help stroking her thick head. A system message flickered suddenly in his mind, as if from a game. "You have gained the affection of the magical creature cat, Madame Norris, at proficient level. Proficiency 10. Startled, Chien opened the panel. The proficiency details expanded. Magical creature cat, unfamiliar 90. Apprentice level magical creature affection. Unlocks apprentice level title in magical creatures field upon reaching threshold. What an unexpected benefit, he thought, and continued down the corridor, moving as quietly as he could. Far behind him, in the darker end of the passage, two yellowish eyes hovered like pale lanterns. Madame Norris glided along, her padded feet silent on the cold stones, her bulbous yellow eyes fixed unblinkingly on the small figure ahead. The little dried fish quivered between her teeth, sending a faint fishy smell into the air and catching the moonlight with every tilt of her head. "Oh, Minerva, just as I said, magical creatures always spot the kind children," a voice drawled. The old wizard in purple robes stood by a shining suit of armor, his tone full of amused meaning. Beside him, the tall witch watched with a worried, pale expression, her gaze wavering in the torchlight. At that moment, the old wizard blinked, and the suit of armor nearest Chien suddenly let its sword clatter free. The clang echoed far too loudly in the quiet corridor. Chien stiffened. Had he been so sleepy, he imagined touching the armor? He hastened his step, anxious to put distance between himself and trouble. A figure carrying a lantern burst from behind a tapestry to his right, breath ragged, eyes darting like a trapper's. He wore a thick plaid scarf, and his nose was very red from the cold. Chien flattened himself against the armor, heart pounding. "Chien Green! Night tour, causing trouble! I've had enough of this!" Filch barked. "Green, come with me!" It was over. Chien sighed and stepped out from behind the suit of armor. McGonagall, standing by another suit of armor, turned her head sharply. Her eyes were practically spitting fire. The old wizard pretended not to notice, smiling placidly as he diverted his gaze. "Ah, Minerva, we both know this child shouldn't be harshly punished," he said in his gentle voice. "But let us see how he faces. Mr. Filch?" Chien had never expected to enter Filch's office this way. Most students avoided the place like a curse. Filch's office was a dim, grubby room with no windows and a single oil lamp hanging from the low ceiling. The air smelled faintly of fried fish. Wooden filing cabinets lined the walls, their labels detailing every punishment Filch had doled out. Fred and George alone had filled an entire drawer. Hanging behind Filch's desk were chains, handcuffs, leg irons, and similar implements. Everyone knew Filch was forever asking permission to suspend students from the ceiling by their ankles. Shien's eyes were drawn instead to the mud-splattered floor and the walls, and to the disgusting sight of what looked like rat intestines pinned up nearby, a clear prank by some bold student. Filch paced and muttered, "Damn brats, more mud, more scrubbing, 3 hours' work," he spat. "Ah, Green, so bold. I must make an example of you. The form, here it is." He produced a large roll of parchment, unrolled it with a greasy flourish, then took up a long black quill and dabbed it into the inkwell. "Name Shien Green. Crime, night tour," Shien said honestly. Filch snorted in disgust. "Since you know your crime, how dare you be so bold? I'll see you expelled," he said viciously. Chapter 76. Choice. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Filch," Shien whispered, sincere. He didn't hate Filch the way some of the other students did. He could forgive the caretaker for his gruffness, just as he wouldn't hold Professor Snape entirely responsible for what had happened. If anything, Shien blamed his own slow progress. If he'd been quicker, none of this would have dragged on. Still, after nearly a month of effort, failing at the last step stung. Filch stood stunned for a moment, and then, with a hiss, went back to filling in his report. That gave Shien a sliver of hope. Hogwarts rules, he knew, were flexible in practice. For being out at night, McGonagall could be severe. She once hovered over Harry and his friends with the kind of fury Harry reckoned could rival a dragon. Yet more often, she was strict on principle rather than piling on detentions. Flitwick, Shien thought, could be reasoned with. Sprout, warm and indulgent, might scold Hufflepuffs for getting into scrapes, but would still secretly leave them a box of treats. As long as the incident didn't reach Snape, Shien hoped he could avoid any punitive potion practice detention. A cold doubt nagged at him, though. Snape had been displeased with Shien's recent slackness. Could this whole business of his being out at night be part of the Potions Master's plan? Filch and Snape seemed on speaking terms in the original story. Filch had even tended Snape's bite wound. Could Snape have set something up? The test was simple. See who Filch intended to report to. The noise overhead cut through Shien's worry, a loud bang from the ceiling. The oil lamp quivered. "Peeves," Filch roared, flinging down his quill. "This time I won't let you off." While Filch fumed, Shien darted forward and glanced at the half-completed form on the desk. A large, scrawled S sat by the space for the professor's name. He sighed internally, but there was another thing on the desk, a bulging purple envelope with silver lettering. A gust of wind threatened to lift it away. Shien snatched it up. Across the front were the words, "Invitation to the Quick Spell Correspondence Course." Shien's emerald eyes brightened. He remembered how, in the original tale, Harry found such a letter and Filch let him off. He didn't expect Filch to have one so soon. A nimble shape leapt into the room and landed on the table. Madame Norris, Filch's scowling cat, slit the envelope open with a claw. Her tail flicked as she read aloud in her cat-like way. "Do you feel you can't keep up with the pace of the modern magical world? Do you find yourself avoiding simple spells? Have you been mocked for clumsy wand work? Quick Spell can help. Quick Spell is a foolproof, fast, and easy-to-learn course. Hundreds of thousands of wizards have benefited. After one Quick Spell course, I became the life of every party," says the annoying Lady of Topsham. "My friends keep asking for my recipe for glittering potion. My wife used to mock my clumsy magic," says the troublemaking wizard of Ditchesbury. "But after a month in Quickspell class, I turned her into a yak. Thank you, Quickspell." Madame Norris finished with a disdainful meow and flicked her tail at the scuffed wall. Shien smiled faintly and flicked his wand. "Scourgify!" A streak of light ran from the tip of his wand, and the dirt on the wall vanished. He, with another swift gesture, tidied the room with a levitation charm, stacking fallen objects neatly. His wand tip glowed, and the stains diminished one by one. When he finished, he was breathless. Madame Norris jumped up and rubbed her head against his cheek. Under the wavering lamp, boy and cat leaned against one another for a moment. "You were making the commotion upstairs as well, weren't you, madam?" Shien murmured. "It was a pleasure to work with you." Madame Norris purred and twined her tail around his neck. System notification. You have gained the affection of the magical creature cat, Madame Norris. Proficiency +10. Filch's voice broke in, incoherent with surprise. A little gust had blown the letter back into Shien's hand. He and Filch stared at each other. Filch's knotted fingers twisted together. "Oh, actually, No, it's not mine. It's for a friend," he muttered, flustered. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to look. I won't say a word," Shien replied, steady and honest. Filch sagged with relief. Good, good. Go on, go on." He stared at the newly clean room, as if not quite believing it. An accident, an accident. We can trust him, can't we, my dear madam?" Madame Norris patted over and rubbed Filch's leg. Her yellow eyes seemed to say she agreed. Night deepened. Voices whispered in the corridor beyond. "It is not our abilities that make us what we are," a kindly old voice said, the man's deep blue eyes far away. "It is our choices. Anger is the easiest choice, but that child didn't choose it, did he?" "Do you really think this is reasonable, Dumbledore?" McGonagall's tone was cold. She brushed past. "To truly understand a person, observe how he treats those of lower status," Dumbledore replied softly. "Forgive me, Minerva." Then his figure melted into the dark. In the Ravenclaw dormitory, Shien flipped through the Standard Book of Spells, grade 7, studying the section on nonverbal spells. He felt he had finally grasped a few new points and planned to ask Professor Flitwick about them after Transfiguration the next day. He did not notice the two pairs of eyes watching him from the shadowed corridor outside. Chapter 77, Love Outside. The sky was already as black as ink. In a large, elegant circular room, silver objects gleamed on display, and beside them sat a soot-streaked teapot that still gurgled. The walls were hung with portraits of former heads. Though they usually dozed in their frames, today the lady in the center, long, curly silver hair, couldn't help but speak. "Principal Albus, you are far too cautious. You struck down the sword and placed the letter in his hand. My dear sir, anyone can tell he is a pure and kind child." Dumbledore sat in an armchair, his deep blue eyes distant and unfocused. The water in the teapot boiled, subsided, and boiled again. Only when a raven passed overhead did he lift his gaze slowly. "That is the problem, Headmistress Dilys Derwent. There has never been a trace of hatred in his eyes. You and I both know how rare that kind of purity is. A wizard's subconscious reactions cannot be controlled, even in precocious, intelligent children. If a child can clearly distinguish right from wrong, remain calm in urgent and oppressive situations, and still look for kindness behind anger, pettiness, and prejudice, if such a child cannot be called pure, then the word has lost its meaning. But how are we to face such purity? Light can do nothing for a festering soul, and yet a few faint candles can keep a child going for a long journey. He was loved in a way that banished ugliness and resentment. I thought I might never see such love again. Love makes one resolute and self-possessed. We know indifference is easy. Only those with character and courage dare to care about everything the world offers. Compared to wizards, magical creatures are always more sensitive. Even a hint of malice will make them cower. And yet this child has always been surrounded by love. Do you not understand, Dilys? That love must have vanished. Only dead love could yield such tenderness. So many lessons have taught us what is wrong. A child who has lost all support, who resolves to rely only on himself, yet displays astonishing talent. This reminds me of a mistake I made 50 years ago, one I have regretted ever since. Such a child is resolute and unnerving, because that dead love detaches him from the world. I cannot imagine what foothold he still has here. His lack of resentment does not mean he will not be disappointed. His lack of anger does not mean he has no pent-up feelings. When the last echoes of love disappear, when he is strong enough, what will he still care about? We must be kind first, that is crucial, and then just. I dare not arrogantly try to guide or correct the life of a child who is both talented and kind. I have paid dearly for such arrogance. But what are we to do, Dilys? Are we to let him face a cold, harsh world alone, quietly crushing and swallowing everything until he loses the ability to love? If there is an answer, it is to trust in the greatest magic, love. The deepest, most mysterious, most profound love can gently bring him fully into the world again. Love can reach an almost closed heart and coax it open. All we need is enough patience and kindness to stir that guarded soul. Only such a grand magic can help him find his place and be willing, gently, to live in it. Hogwarts weekends were a mixture of laziness and urgency. The students who had played hard all weekend faced their homework with sour faces, while those who were finished early found distractions beyond the castle's views, like two boys arguing over a set of notes. Mr. Green, however, did not notice any of that. All Sunday morning, he had been poring over the Standard Book of Spells, grade 6, and looking for Professor Flitwick. The search ended in disappointment. The professor seemed to be out. Passing a portrait, the fat lady obligingly informed Mr. Green that Flitwick was probably too drunk to walk and had been seen at the Three Broomsticks. In the blink of an eye, it was Monday. The first Charms class of the morning joined Ravenclaw and Gryffindor together. On a stack of books between the rows, Professor Flitwick flicked his wand and sent Neville's toad hopping and flying around the classroom. Excitement spread, and the students were paired up to practice. "Pronunciation is crucial," Professor Flitwick warned, his tiny voice echoing. "Never forget poor Baruffio, who said F instead of S, and found himself on the floor with a buffalo on his chest." Despite the explanation, the spell was still difficult. Seamus flicked and swished his wand over and over, and the feather that should have floated remained stubbornly on the floor. Frustrated, he poked at it with his wand, and the feather burst into flame. Mr. Green, who was nearby, immediately doused it with an aguamenti, snuffing the fire. "Wingardium Leviosa!" A feather trembled, lifted, and hovered. Gasps rippled through the room. "Brilliant." They all looked over, eyes widened. "Long bottom? Is that long bottom? Oh my goodness!" Neville's face turned a deep shade of red as whispers circled. "Oh, well done," came from several students. Professor Flitwick clapped his hands. "Everyone, look, Mr. Longbottom has succeeded. I'll award Gryffindor 3 points." Neville flushed even more. His hands trembled. Before class ended, Professor Flitwick called him over. Neville, still shaking, blurted out everything. "Mr. Green taught me, Professor. The notes. Yes, the notes. If it weren't for Mr. Green, I wouldn't have learned anything. It was all Mr. Green." He stammered the last words, and Professor Flitwick, as if hearing the happiest news, took Neville's notebook and smiled, his mustache curling up. Of course, Mr. Green is a very talented wizard," he said as he crouched to pat Neville's shoulder. "But, Mr. Longbottom, you are not bad at all." Chapter 78. Nonverbal Spells at Hogwarts. Nonverbal spells were taught in the 6th year. Defense against the dark arts, charms, and transfiguration all expected students to master them. Most adult wizards in Britain were supposed to be able to perform nonverbal magic, but because 6th and 7th year courses were electives, some students might not have taken any of those classes. Proficiency varied widely. "So, you want to learn nonverbal spells?" Professor Flitwick asked in the afternoon, standing at the front of the classroom and looking at Chien with a mixture of surprise and relief. "Yes, Professor." Chien nodded. "Very well. Show me your levitation charm." Flitwick began, pointing at a chair. Before he finished speaking, Chien gave the incantation silently. The wooden chair rose almost immediately and spun a few times in the air. "That's truly astonishing progress," Flitwick applauded. "Now, Mr. Green," he continued, "tell me, what are the advantages of nonverbal spells and the disadvantages?" Chien's first answer was lifted directly from Standard Book of Spells, grade 6. "The advantage is your opponent won't know what spell you intend to cast, which gives you a momentary edge." He thought for 2 seconds, then added thoughtfully, "Of course, if you lose the enhanced accuracy and emotional emphasis that comes from speaking the incantation aloud, the spell can be weaker." Flitwick's expression brightened. "Excellent answer. When a wizard is mature enough to accurately visualize the intent of a spell in his mind and concentrate without speaking, he can learn nonverbal magic. Clearly, Mr. Green, it's time for us to reach a higher level." He waved his wand. The chair began to fly around the classroom. Books, jars, and even a squirrel that had slipped in through the window lifted and darted across the room. "The trick to nonverbal spells is extreme concentration," Flitwick explained. "When wizards cast, they often subvocalize the incantation without realizing it, which causes nonverbal attempts to fail. You must have the spell precisely formed in your mind. Try it, Mr. Green." Cien's quill scratched beside him. With magic, he could think and take notes at the same time. Flitwick watched intently, patient even when Xian failed 3 times in a row. It was hard for someone trained to speak every spell aloud to go silent. The urge to speak was almost physical. He had to resist it with willpower, which made his lips tense and his whole body feel awkward, like trying desperately not to sneeze. But under Flitwick's guidance, he grew more accustomed to the silence. Only when he made no sound at all did Flitwick say, "What rapid progress! Let's move on to the next step. Focus on both the spell and the emotion when you use nonverbal magic. Strong concentration and willpower are needed to call a spell in your mind without a sound. This is very difficult. Emotion, firm will, and a precise mental image of the spell. Cien thought about that, then flicked his wand. You practiced the levitation charm to an expert standard, proficiency 50. Merlin, he blurted. October was approaching. A damp chill crept over the grounds and into the castle. Heavy raindrops hammered the windows for days on end. The lake rose, the flower beds were a muddy mess, and the pumpkins outside Hagrid's hut swelled to the size of garden sheds. Perhaps the mental exhaustion from nonverbal practice had weakened him. Perhaps Professor Snape's exacting demands in potions had worn him down. Or perhaps the night air was simply too cold. Whatever the reason, right after he had mastered nonverbal spells, Xian came down with a bad cold. He breathed heavily, his nostrils flared, and his cheeks and forehead were fever-hot. He felt dizzy and disoriented, twice looking at people and confusing Hermione with Professor McGonagall. After all, only the day before McGonagall had been teaching Cien in her office while Hermione had been guiding Justin in the corridor. Michael had taken 2 photos from the office window. Hermione's mannerisms and movements had been almost identical to the headmistress's. No Transfiguration practice today, McGonagall said briskly as she placed a hand on the young wizard's brow. Go to the Great Hall and drink some pumpkin juice, child. Her hand was like a furnace. She led him vaguely toward the Great Hall. Cien checked his progress even as he sat at the long table. He had successfully cast the nonverbal levitation charm that morning. Now he only needed to learn the smokescreen spell and the knockback jinx, and he would qualify for the scholarship he wanted so badly. Flitwick had been eager to teach him privately, but could he really perform well in his current state? Finally, he thought of the one person in Hogwarts who could fix almost anything, Madame Pomfrey in the hospital wing. Her cures were the stuff of legend. Ginny Weasley's ankle had been healed in a blink. Harry Potter's fractured skull had been stapled back together almost immediately. After Lockhart's bumbling attempt in the second year, she had used Skelegro to regrow the 33 bones in Harry's arm. Pomfrey's record was practically miraculous. Let's go to the hospital wing, Xian rasped. Justin, who had been fussing beside him, snapped to attention and helped him up. McGonagall moved with efficient speed. Hogwarts was well prepared for student colds, and the hospital wing kept a miraculous cold potion. The very best draughts were sometimes brewed personally by the Slytherin head of house. At the end of the corridor, McGonagall stopped and found Snape. Severus, I need a potion for a cold, she said. Snape was silent for a moment, then replied in his usual cool tone. Professor McGonagall, if I am not mistaken, treating students' colds seems to be my responsibility. Chapter 79, Smokescreen Spell. Outside the corridor, raindrops had been pattering like pellets for days. Minerva McGonagall sensed that something was wrong, though she couldn't say what. Her stern face softened for a moment with puzzlement, then she caught sight of a half-hidden potion bottle peeking from beneath a wide robe, a stimulant for treating colds. As if piecing something together, she turned slightly. Snape followed her gaze and understood immediately. Without expression, he brushed past Professor McGonagall. I'll take responsibility, he said. His black robes billowed as he hurried toward the Great Hall. The students who had been standing in the doorway watching the rain their necks and fell back to make way. Inside the Great Hall, Justin was supporting Xian steadily. Hermione had just arrived and, without pausing to eat, shoved her way forward while scolding them both non-stop. Merlin's beard. It's so hot. Xian, you really are impossible when you're stubborn, she snapped. And one idiot even needs to be told what to do. Professor Snape's right. You two should be tied to a flagpole. She muttered to herself, chastising. It's my fault, too. I should have noticed earlier. His face was pale yesterday. Justin, usually gentle, looked blank and said only, They just reached the entrance to the Great Hall when the heavy footsteps announced someone approaching. A figure in black robes loomed into view. Justin looked up and recognized Professor Snape. He showed no fear. He and Hermione stepped aside and bowed their heads, preparing to move past. A shadow fell over them. "Give him to me," Snape said coldly. Justin, dazed, looked up and shuffled another step aside. Only the thought of hospital wing kept looping in his head. He could scarcely parse Snape's words. "He should go to the hospital wing, Professor Snape," Hermione said bluntly. Snape's sneer made the students nearby shiver. "Then you should know what potions are given in the hospital wing for a chill." His expression darkened as he noticed how unresponsive the boy being supported actually was. Shien's emerald eyes were only half open, his lips trembling with each puff of hot breath. "Give it to him, now, immediately," he barked. A potion bottle sailed into Hermione's hands. Momentarily stunned, she snapped to and forced it to Shien's lips. The stimulant took effect at once. Smoke seemed to puff from Shien's ears, like steam from the Hogwarts Express, and his mind cleared. Things snapped into focus. The small figures before him resolved into familiar faces: Professor McGonagall, Hermione, and someone in a dark cloak. A dark shape had dropped a bottle in the practice room. Now it all came back to him. With more strength, Shien pushed open the practice room door from the inside. Amid the odd, indignant squawks of an owl, "Phileas, it's you again, for Ravenclaw's sake. Hurry in." A short, beaming professor stepped through the doorway and made himself comfortable on a nearby table. Professor Flitwick examined him over his spectacles. "So glad to see you much better, Mr. Green," he chirped. The squirrels that had been in the room scattered in panic out the window. "But my dear Mr. Green," Flitwick added, "rest is often for the better. Are you sure you want to study right now?" Shien waited for a few seconds. He thought back to the list in Dark Forces: a guide to self-protection, green sparks, red sparks, knockback jinx, smokescreen spell, Lumos. Of those practical spells, he still needed to learn the smokescreen spell and the knockback jinx. His Defense Against the Dark Arts notes covered the theory, but he lacked the required practical spells. With 2 days left until Friday, he had to reach an introductory level in both. He nodded. Flitwick sighed as if he'd expected that answer, then brightened. "Very well, Mr. Green. I won't loosen standards, especially for talented pupils." They began with the smokescreen spell, a basic defensive charm used to release a cloud of smoke that obscures vision. It was invaluable in duels. An opponent could not aim properly through it. Garrick Ollivander was noted to be an excellent practitioner of it. Shien discovered something else about this smoke. It was almost subjective. He tapped his wand and cast. Fumos. A dark cloud blossomed around him, swallowing sight. Not only could no light penetrate it, but even sound seemed to die inside the smoke. Its usefulness was far greater than he'd expected, much like Lumos. The textbooks listed Lumos in Defense Against the Dark Arts for a reason. Besides lighting the way, Lumos could repel spirits and spectral foes. The defense text mentioned the Gytrash, a pale, dog-like creature with a forked tail that lurked in British forests, even in the Forbidden Forest at Hogwarts, and how light could be used against such entities. Shien recalled a line from Madame Miranda Goshawk in Standard Spells. Primary: when a wizard has a need, a spell will appear. Those seemingly impractical spells have helped wizards throughout history. There are no useless spells, only useless wizards. When Flitwick left, pleased with the lesson, Shien still had an ice pack on his head. Fatigue had hampered his casting. After an afternoon of effort, he had only just unlocked the smokescreen spell to an introductory standard. Proficiency: smokescreen spell, apprentice 150-300. With a little more practice, he could reach mastery by evening. Friday loomed. Shien looked forward to the results of his work. Time moved quickly, and it was soon Thursday morning. After Shien had fallen ill, Justin and Hermione had become far more attentive to him. Before long, they discovered something that was hardly surprising. Chapter 80. I Have Friends. No letters received, no one to contact, not even knowing his own birthday. Justin said this quietly to Hermione as they sat by the long house table. Sunlight had already slipped through the tall, stained-glass windows, scattering motes of light and shadow over the benches. The air smelled of toast, fried bacon, and pumpkin juice, but the clatter and chatter of 100 students almost swallowed the breakfast smells. A few second years a short way off were arguing hotly over a wand gesture, nearly overturning the jam. On the Hufflepuff side, a round-faced boy produced a cauldron cake, and the Never Go Hungry Club nearly pounced on it. The Gryffindor table buzzed with students clustered around the Quidditch captain as he demonstrated a new broom maintenance kit. Then a distant, rhythmic flapping grew louder and louder. "The owls are here!" The hall rose to a shout and a hum of excitement as dozens of owls poured through the high windows and circled beneath the enchanted ceiling. Letters, packages, and magazines fluttered down like rain. "It's a reply," someone cried. Hermione folded her family letter carefully and tucked it away. Owl post usually arrived quickly enough that piles never formed, but surprises still happened. Justin did the same, but his voice was low. He watched a fellow student, a young wizard with an ice pack on his head, scribbling in a notebook with the single-mindedness of someone who wouldn't be deterred even by a draught to the ears. Justin's gaze dropped, his fingers tightened on his robe. In that cramped, expectant atmosphere, he said, almost to himself, "The winter in Scotland is harsh, and I've never seen him wearing a proper robe." Hermione's reply drifted around the surface of the remark. "I suppose those losses shaped him, didn't they?" "She didn't," Justin began, but then cut off and turned his face away. He looked small in the dappled light. "No, Hermione, I don't mean that. In those cold winters, he needed more than strength. He needed safety." At that moment, an owl in a neat little jacket alighted at their table, and to Justin's complete astonishment, seemed to make a small indignant sound that any listening human could have interpreted as speech. "No letters received? Of course, that's not true." The owl seemed to say, "There was a wizard who wanted to contact him." "Mr. Owl, are you saying?" A voice near the Ravenclaw table blurted. "I disdain such base rumors," another owl retorted, and someone muttered, Merlin's owl." A tiny fracas of avian identities ensued. "I'm Miss Ravenclaw's owl," and Justin's thoughts, already scattered, went spinning. He stared as the little owl blinked, and to his utter relief, preened as if confirming that there really had been a wizard who wanted to contact CN. Justin could hardly contain himself. Miss Finch Fletchley would be so proud. He was halfway to pleading out loud before he realized he already was. "Please," Justin begged the owl. "Just one question." "Ask 100 if you like," the owl seemed to reply, shaking a wing with the pomp of an official messenger. "Is an owl an eagle?" Justin blurted, half joking in his nervousness. "Of course not." The owl appeared to scoff with all the dignity a bird could muster. Then, with a decisive flap, as if accepting a charge, it fixed Justin with a sharp, earnest look. "I will take care of this matter. Go find your friend." Before Justin could think of anything else, the owl's feathers shimmered faintly and it gave a soft cry. Shien, you must come." Justin sprang up and hurried to the classroom. Shien was still bent over his notes for Professor Flitwick's class, reading The Dark Arts, a guide to self-protection, and making careful annotations. He had been thinking about the knockback jinx, classified, like other spells, in categories: charm, curse, jinx, and hex. The jinx ending marked it as a jinx, a relatively minor, irritating kind of magic, and Professor Flitwick always taught such things with extreme caution. On the cover of Shien's notebook, Flitwick had written, in his neat, wary hand, "Caution and restraint are the principal rules for learning the dark arts." "Shien, come with us, hurry," Justin urged, an anxious smile tugging at him. The excessive fuss Justin and Hermione had made around Shien during his recent illness had left him a little bewildered, but he rose without protest. Just 2 seconds of sleep, and they'd wrapped him in a blanket and turned out the lights. Such overcare seemed ridiculous and sweet at once. He nodded. They made their way to the common room, where the fire burned bright. The three of them, Justin and Hermione tense and hopeful, Shien quietly puzzled, sat by the hearth. Justin murmured something about family. Real family. Hermione's face flushed, either from the warmth of the flames or from nerves. She sat so still she could have been carved. A sudden puff of green flame burst from the fireplace. Everyone inhaled. Even Shien watched with a small spark of curiosity. The flu powder cleared, and a familiar, stern face looked out at them. "It can't be," Justin breathed. "Professor," Hermione and Justin both said before Chien could decide how to address her. It was Professor McGonagall, slightly smaller than Chien had expected when she appeared in the fireplace. She glanced around with brisk, perceptive eyes, and then, as if recognizing who had sent for her, she allowed a small, approving nod. Her gaze fell on Chien, and her expression wholly softened. "Mr. Chien Green," she said. Chien felt strangely pleased rather than embarrassed. He had never seen a professor materialize out of the flu before, and the sight of Professor McGonagall looking at him so kindly struck him as oddly wonderful. Justin, who had been pacing in agitation, seemed suddenly to deflate. "I'm sorry, Chien," he whispered. "I thought—" "This isn't your fault, Justin," Chien interrupted softly. "You've done enough. I'm grateful." He picked up the little notebook from Flitwick, thumbed the first page, and smiled with an easy, steady calm. "What I've lost isn't what matters. What matters is what I still have, friends. Friendship," he added, "is the way two hearts lean toward one another." Justin heard those words like a whisper from his mother and felt something inside him nearly break, then settle. The tense room relaxed. The warmth from the fire seemed to reach them more than just physically. "Thanks for the support. Puppet Old K, Reckless Spirit, Mirror Profound, Ling Fengmian, I Am a Mountain Man, Kapak, Jinlike K, Jixia Beast-Faced Human Liver, Yifeng Changyun, Blank Picture, Bai Shu, Like Water, Body-Eating Snake, Suddenly Like a Night of Fish and Dragons Dancing, Book Friend 61010936350, Palinite, Delicious Crispy and Numb, It's That Xiao Ming, Daydream, Book Friend 20208822125635, Qianyu Lingfeng, Xia Shuang, 3 Rings, 18 Bens, 7 South, 500 Years of Gaokao, 300 Years of Mock Exams, Yundong, Book Friend 291264253013, Northern Science Primordial Wisdom Daojin, Hayato 5959, All I Think of Are Stars, All I Remember Are You, Tutoran, Book Friend 24032143152906, ZPPBB, Youth Wasted in Vain, Olingo, WZNLSI, Book Friend 22405-3660, Happy Joker, Menue Chiki, Book Friend 2221-6, 07513134, Sie, Sleep on Rainy Days, Flowing Light Never Fades, Myriad Self Second Form Reverse Flow Body Protection Seal, Jerome, Supernova 518, Book Friend 2906111342448884, Lid Lazy Ray, Book Friend 2250825 010856556, Kite Knight, Book Friend 29052623102544, Crazy Wind Tianlei, Want to Sleep My Monthly Pass.